Georgia, the experience of the reforms of Moldova in judicial system is especially significant. As you know, EU's approach to enlargement policies taking place more in regional context, and association trio Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, who were working for many years to receive the membership of European Union. In March 2022, the Republic of Moldova, like Georgia, presented its application for membership of the European Union. And Georgia received 12 recommendations from European Commission to get candidate status, from which the judicial part turned out to be one of the most difficult to implement and which has not been tangibly fulfilled so far. Draft law on the reform of the court system was prepared, and on this reform, the Venice Commission, from the Venice Commission, we received very critical opinion. Also, the involvement of the civil society during the preparation of legislative changes was problematic. Commission gave recommendations to Moldova for membership of EU based upon a comprehensive justice system reform should be implemented. And like Georgia, where the judicial system is managed through the Supreme Court of Justice, was recommended to fill all the remaining vacancies of the Council. And now I would like to welcome our amazing speakers from Moldova, who will present us the main points of the reforms of the judicial system in Moldova to the way of EU integration. And our first presenter and expert of the discussion is Ili Chirtuaca. Ili is a legal researcher and consultant, program director at the Legal Resources Center from Moldova, with 9 years of professional experience in the not-for-profit sector. Previously, he was involved in monitoring and evaluations, the mechanisms and practice of selection and promotion of judges and prosecutors, development and implementation of the percentage designation mechanism, as well as the concept of the new legislation regulating the not-for-profit sector in the Republic of Moldova. Ili is the author of the first podcast series dedicated to digital rights and artificial intelligence made in Moldova. And since 2022, Ili is a member of the Integrity Council, a collegial board of the National Integrity Authority from Moldova. So, Ili, the floor is yours, and with pleasure, we will listen to your speech.
Thank you very much, Captain. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I want to make sure you hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And I have also a presentation, and I hope you can see it.
We can see.
Great. So I'll start, and I hope not to take your time, a lot of your time. I will try to be very, very, very brief. Basically, I wanted to tell you a bit about how we ended up here, how before Moldova was granted candidate status, what was the situation, and what are the key reforms. But before that, I must tell you a bit about the Legal Resources Center. We are a think tank established in 2010 from lawyers, including Ion, who is here as a second speaker. He is actually the co-founder of LRCM. We are a not-profit and independent organization, and our mission is to promote an independent and efficient and accountable judiciary. We act through public policy analysis and advocacy. We do some monitoring and strategic litigation, and we also do other empowerment activities such as trainings for legal professionals, judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and other professionals. I have no idea how I got some subtitles in the PowerPoint presentation, but if they don't annoy you, I guess they will continue. So you can reach us at lrcm.org or contact lrcm.org. I wanted to talk a bit about the overview of the judicial reforms, because the judicial reform that is now undergoing in Moldova is not the first one. Let's hope but this time it will be successful. And how we ended up here, also about a little bit about the key judicial reforms and their progress. What are the obstacles? What are the challenges? What is the resistance and the constitutional battles? Because the current judicial reform is met with high resistance, and we will talk about why this is happening. What is the role of the Council of Europe Venice Commission in all this, and of course the European Commission, but also other EU and Council of Europe bodies? What is the impact? And of course, I will say as a disclaimer, it's too soon to assess the impact, but basically, what are the first results of the reforms and where we expect this is all going? Last but not least, concerns and challenges. What are the lessons learned? What are the next steps? And what are the conclusions? I'll try to be very brief, and I promise I will take less than it was indicated in the agenda. So we start with 1991 up to 2000. This is basically described as the first wave of the reforms. In this period, we had our first constitution approved in 1994, but the majority of the legislation, it was basically replica of the Soviet Union legislation. And we can say that mentality too. Nevertheless, we had the first laws on organization of the judiciary, the first laws on the status of judges in Moldova, first appointments as a democratic countries. Next, we have a period which we could characterize as a backslide, because from 2000 and 2009 we had a Communist Party comeback. Actually, it was the single example from the former Soviet Union countries where a Communist Party, which usually was banned after 1990s, was back in power with absolute majority. And this period, the Communist Party has established a very strong political influence over the judiciary. This is the first time when judges were not confirmed after their first initial 5-year mandate, and many of the judges, good judges from the system, resigned because of the high pressure. Of course, it was also a time when some good things happened. For example, the first school of magistracy, the institution who now prepare judges and prosecutors, was established in this time. This is the former president of our country, also a police general, communist Vladimir Voronin, and he basically is the one who we can thank for now for having a judicial academy, but not for ruling the system back in 2001, 2009. In 2011, 2017, we had the first democratic / kleptocratic coalition of pro-European, so-called pro-European countries, parties, and also the first ambitious reform strategy, which had comprehensive overview, all the actors involved, and we started very good. However, in 2017, because of the cosmetic changes and not a genuine reform of the judiciary, the EU decided to freeze its financial support to Moldova. So basically, the third wave of the reform of the judiciary ended up with the EU freezing its financial support for us because of the many scandals and events which were somehow related to the judiciary sector. And I'll discuss in a minute what it was about. Last but not least, current days, let's say, we have a new iteration of the reform, a comprehensive document approved, a roadmap approved by the parliament. What is changed now is that in Moldova, we have a single party, pro-European party, which rules with absolute majority, comfortable majority. And for the very first time, we can say that there is political will to do something more than cosmetic changes. And this pro-EU party, the centerpiece of this reform of the judiciary entails the extraordinary evaluation of judges and prosecutors, which I will be talking about in a bit. About this, the impact of this reform, it's of course very soon to tell something. We have some good first results. However, as we can see from the past experience, we need to wait a bit more and see the actual results of the reform. The reform is scheduled to end back in 2025, and it has three pillars: independence, efficiency, and accountability of the judiciary. I wanted to talk a bit about how we ended up here and why such critical and perhaps not very popular and very invasive reform was necessary. I'm talking here about the extraordinary evaluation of judges' integrity and professionalism. And basically, I want just to highlight a few examples. In Moldova, in 2009 and 2011, more than $20 billion were laundered through the judiciary system. In 2014, we had a bank fraud. Basically, 20% of our GDP was siphoned through 3 banks. And in 2018, we had local elections which were won by an opposition candidate annulled. And also we had many examples of state enterprises privatizations, basically attacks on state-owned enterprises or privatization of land in the center of the Chisinau at lowest prices possible. And all this is related to the judiciary in so many ways. But basically, with the Russian laundromat, judges were the one who issued basically judgments or decisions which allowed cleaning the money from Russia and taking them forward to the EU banks absolutely clean. In case of the bank fraud, it was judges who had a very important role of suspending national bank orders, by which the national bank tried to stop some of the operations. In the local elections in 2018, it was judges who annulled the election basically solely on the fact that one of the candidates in the election day called on the voters to vote for him on Facebook. And since we had a so-called silent day, this was not allowed. And just because of this reason, the election were annulled. Now, in the last case with state enterprises, it was judges who ordered the state to sell, to privatize, or to give for less than a penny state property at ridiculously low prices. So all of this was happening, actually in 2019, when the International Commission of Jurists came to Moldova, this is an excerpt from their mission report, which was saying that actually in the judiciary system, they were witness of statements and stories of judges living often in a condition of fear to express their opinion on the situation of the judiciary, fear of criminal prosecution, fear of dismissal procedures, and basically anything which was in disagreement with the judicial nomenclature and the hierarchy was basically perceived as a threat. So we can say that even some of the judges' involvement in the bank fraud or laundromat was because of the pressure within the system, the high hierarchy, which told them or quashed their judgments of if you are against, they will give a disciplinary procedure. So we have this situation here, and this is somehow an incredible assessment which prove that some of the measures which were back then introduced, they were not successful, and we needed basically something else. In the meantime, what was happening with the current mechanism of accountability of the judiciary, judges' performance evaluation was very good or excellent. This is a table from this body who was responsible for performance evaluation, and back in 2009, all the judges from the Supreme Court, from the courts of appeal, or from they were graded excellent, so no problem whatsoever. All of this, of course, changed with the 2021 elections, where we had a new parliament and a new governing party, which basically came in the parliament with a strong anti-corruption and cleansing and reforming the judiciary message. Therefore, as they were put in office, they started they announced and started to put on the agenda some serious reforms. And first and foremost, the reforms is, of course, revamping or changing the components of the Superior Council of Magistracy, and basically putting there more civil society voice, more dissent, in order to provide a checks and balances mechanism. So if previously the judges were actually a majority in the council, from 2022, and this is now already a law, the components of the High Judicial Council, the Superior Council of Magistracy, is 12 members. 6 are career judges and 6 are non-career judges, basically civil society representatives, either from academia or think tanks or other profile, but not judges. The other reforms, and we will stop here a bit longer, is the external evaluation, which is also called the pre-vetting of the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council candidates. This means that every new members who wish to be elected in the Superior Council, in the High Judicial of Judges or High Judicial Council of the Prosecutors, need to pass through a filter, through an integrity check. This integrity check is done by an international commission formed from 3 nationals, for 3 citizens of Moldova. They are appointed by the parliament, and 3 international members who are proposed by the international development partners of Moldova from the field of the judiciary, but also are approved by the parliament. And what they do, they basically, each candidate, before being selected to the Superior Council of Magistracy, the body who selects, promotes, dismisses judges, they will evaluate his or her integrity. And when we talk about integrity, we mean 2 things: financial integrity and ethical integrity. They don't look into the professionalism, but they look into financial and ethics integrity. How they are doing this? They are doing this based on previous declaration of income, on checking personal interest, and also checking ethics behavior. So, for example, if a candidate for this position, who is a judge, went on a summer vacation with a prosecutor, and after this vacation, in 2 months, they end up in the courtroom, and one is a judge and one is a lawyer, and they don't issue a conflict of interest statement or abstain from the process, the commission looked into this kind of things, whether to assess if these candidates have or have not violated the code of ethics. Of course, if there are minor breaches of professional conduct, the law states that this is not a reason to reject a candidate. What would we mean by a minor breach will be maybe forgetting to declare a bank account, but on that bank account there were no money at the time. So basically this ad hoc commission will check last 15 years of the candidate's expenses and income, but also is checking his or her integrity and ethics behavior. Candidates who pass this procedure, they have the right to appeal before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court must decide in 10 days' time if the appeal is admissible. If the appeal is admissible, it will go back to the, this evaluation will go back to the committee, and the committee will need to check again whether there were breaches which will prove paramount in order to reach a different decision. But basically this process has already started. We could say that we are more than halfway there. All the candidates to the Superior Council of Magistracy were checked, and now we are in the process of waiting the results for the verification of the Superior Council of the Prosecutor, which is a mirror institution which is again responsible for selecting, promoting, and disciplining prosecutors. Judges can appeal, and let's talk a bit about the results. So basically, based on this exercise, which was running from 2022, only 20% of all the candidates who registered have passed this exercise, meaning that in 80% of the cases, the candidates were rejected by the committee, which meant that they can still do their job, work as judges or prosecutors, or if they are non-lay members, they can work as lawyers and so on. But they cannot compete, or they cannot be selected for these high judicial councils. And these reforms, when it comes to the judiciary, it's almost finalized. We have a new council in place, which has 8 out of 12 members, and the 4 or 5 members, which the vacancies need to be filled by a similar exercise. So we'll have now expect for 6 or 9 months another exercise where this international commission will check integrity and assets, and they will, after they reach a conclusion, these members could be voted either by the General Assembly of Judges or the Parliament. Another key reform, which is also happening in parallel, and this is actually, let's say, going into a bit of the lessons learned and conclusions, maybe not the best options, because it proves very problematic to have the limited resources of the state channeled through this key reform. So this is the Supreme Court of Justice reform. What it basically entails, change in the number of judges, having less judges on the board. So for example, now we have 33 judges serving at the Supreme Court of Justice. In the law, this is the number written, and this number will be reduced to 20. The structure of the Supreme Court is changed, and the role of the Supreme Court of Justice is also changed, basically meaning that the new role of the Supreme Court of Justice will be a cassation tribunal, which has a main role of ensuring the uniformity of practice, basically having a role to streamline the judicial practice and not serve as another level of hierarchy when it decides the merits of the case. Another paramount change here is that also the profile of the judges who can serve at the Supreme Court changes. So before 2022, at the Supreme Court of Justice, we could only have career judges, meaning judges with at least 10 years of experience in the first instance court of appeal. The reform of the Supreme Court of Justice entails that 9 out of these 20 judges could be non-career judges, so either lawyers, professors, civil society representatives, or other judicial profession, which also have 8 years of experience, and they meet some extra requirements. But also the scope of this reform was to comply with the constitutional amendments, which happened in Moldova back in 2020, to ensure that Superior Council of Supreme Court of Justice judges are not corrupt, and they deliver justice during this vetting exercise, and for the Supreme Court of Justice to serve as an appeal body against the vetting decision. What is of paramount importance to say is that before getting a ticket to Supreme Court of Justice, the candidates will also need to check to pass this external evaluation. Basically, another international committee will check the integrity, the financial integrity, and compliance with the code of ethics, but also the professionalism of the judges. The sitting candidates will be vetted as a matter of priority, and this is actually the time when it starts to happen. So the law on the Supreme Court of Justice entered into force on 6th of April, 2023, and now the Parliament in 1 month's time needs to appoint international and national members on this evaluation committee. And it needs to start the evaluation procedure of sitting judges, but also the ones who want to run for a seat for a Supreme Court of Justice membership. What are the results so far? Because we already have the results of this reform, and it could be described as good or bad depending on how you assess the situation. Basically, before the law was approved, 80% of the judges resigned, of the acting judges. So we had 25 judges in office, out of which 20 resigned before the law was voted. Why this happened? We have the judicial never explained this, but of course there are some theories why this happened. First, the sitting judges saw the results of the pre-vetting and basically saw that their colleagues who run for a seat in the Superior Council of Magistracy failed this evaluation in proportion of 80%. Of course, another reason is a very pragmatic one. If you live now, you can live with special benefits, single allowance, which is quite big. You have your reputation untainted, and you can go and nobody will check anything. This is why some of the judges decided to go here. And on the one hand, this of course evens up the process, but on the other, it of course possesses the challenges because the activity of the Supreme Court is now currently blocked. And speaking of the lessons learned, this is somehow needs to be envisaged how to mitigate such a crisis if the judges from the system do not accept the reform, and basically they boycott the reform by leaving. The Superior Council of Magistracy, and perhaps Yuan will talk a bit more about this, they provided as a temporary solution, a temporary transfer of judges from district courts and courts of appeal to the Supreme Court of Justice to act on a 6 or 9 months basis and basically deal with the most critical cases. But of course, this was also, we could say that this was also happening because the judges did not see, let's say, some incentives to go through this evaluation exercise. So for example, if, as a result of this external evaluation, the judges were granted that their salaries are doubled or they have some extra benefits, we believe there will be this percentage of judges leaving will be less. Now, another process which needs to happen in parallel is the full evaluation of judges, meaning that evaluation of each chief or president of the court or judge who would want to be promoted to another court, to the courts of the appeal or superior council of magistracy. He will have to go again through this vetting exercise. But because there is no Supreme Court of Justice formed yet, this, of course, possesses a challenge. Let's move forward to another reform. This is the Anti-Corruption Court. Basically, the president of the country announced at the beginning of this year that in 3 months there will be an anti-corruption court. Why it is happening? Basically because a lot of the serious cases, like the ones who I was mentioning in the beginning, the bank fraud, the devaluation of the banking system, and many other corruption cases are stale in the courts for many years. No verdicts are happening. No, the process is very dragged, and even the person who were involved in the bank fraud, in the laundromat, they even that a lot of time has passed, and we might reach a day when the statute of limitation expired. These persons are currently in the courts and there are no verdicts available yet. And basically what the government is proposing is establishing an anti-corruption tribunal with judges who will take and judge high-level corruption. We don't know yet the specific of this, but as a civil society organization, we believe there are many risks involved. First and foremost, because Moldova is a very small country, and we basically lack judges who need to be vetted and then to serve on this anti-corruption court. But this is somehow another reform which is piloted now in 2023, and we expect, at least on the paper, that this reform will happen by fall of this year. We actually researched this topic a little bit further, and we developed a policy paper where we look into the caseload, into the what could be the scope of this anti-corruption court and what kind of cases it could have. But based on the fact that Moldova on annual basis has no more than 500 corruption cases, an establishment of an anti-corruption court, it is of course something which could be desirable, but it has huge costs on the budget. Full vetting, last but not least, another reform which basically means that eventually each judge and prosecutor from Moldova will need to pass this external evaluation, where an international commission will check his ethics, his integrity, and his professionalism. Basically, will check how that judge who in 2018 annulled the election basically reasoned his judgments. Initially, it was scheduled by the government to start this fall in 2023. There is already a draft law adopted. It has reached the Venice Commission, and it came back from the Venice Commission with a full list of recommendations. This full vetting can hardly start without an appeal body against the vetting decision, which is at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is now, let's say, very fragile, if not blocked. The vetting does not require the amendment of the Constitution, but the main difference of this full vetting and pre-vetting exercise that is that if the judge or prosecutor fails it, then he or she must be dismissed by the Superior Council of Magistracy. So basically meaning they will lose his or her job. And this is the critical change which is in this draft law and was not in the pre-vetting exercise. Depending on the performance of the pre-vetting committee, the vetting will start in July, most likely, and it could take 3 or 4 years at latest or earliest, let's say. And all this vetting legislation is, of course, somehow inspired or from the example of Albania or Ukraine, with tweaks and also lessons learned from the Moldovan context. What the Venice Commission had to say about all these reforms, basically, it has expressed on a variety of opinions that this is an external and very critical exercise. It might be required if the legislation or there is extreme level of corruption, and it could be justified as a radical solution. But at the end of the day, is the Moldovan or the Moldovan society who needs to decide whether such a measure is necessary. Of course, in case of the full vetting, the Venice Commission had a more broad, more critical opinion, because it entails the negative results of this vetting entails that judges will lose their job. What is the role of the EU? And we started this conversation on the ongoing reforms of Moldova having a candidate status. Moldova received 9 recommendations, and 5 or 6 of them are related somehow to the justice sector reform. But first and foremost, recommendation of the EU was that Moldova needs, before going to the next step, to complete the essential steps of the comprehensive justice reform. And this should be done with the aim to ensure independence, integrity, efficiency, accountability, and transparency. But for the negotiation to start, the EU needs just the first bit. So not the full vetting, not the vetting of the Supreme Court of Justice and the new law of the Supreme Court of Justice, but the finalization of the exercise of the pre-vetting. So we have in place the High Judicial Council of Judges and the High Judicial Council of Prosecutors. This is something which needs to be done and which needs to be finalized by June. And let's say that we are in a rush, but we are hopeful that this will be happening sometime soon. As I was mentioning, the pre-vetting of the High Judicial Council is almost over, but in the place now is the evaluation of judges, of the prosecutors who are running for seats in the High Judicial Council of Prosecutors. What are the concerns and challenges? And I already talked a bit in the presentation about this, but basically all the reforms which started, they're supposed to start not in parallel, but one by one. But because of the dragging the process along the way, because of the fact that we couldn't find the right people to serve on these bodies, then the committee, the external evaluation committee, proved to be slower than initially was projected. The reforms happened in parallel. Because they happened in parallel, this has sparked high turnover and resignation at the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court serving as an appeal body, it basically means that now the judges who are challenging the decision of this high committee, of the evaluation committee, will their cases got stuck at the Supreme Court of Justice. Of course, we had lack of human capital, but this is somehow which is peculiar of Moldova, despite of the sector, the public sector, the private sector, the civil society organization, basically lack of sufficiently good professionals who could serve in these national vetting committees as a member, but also as members of the secretariat, because these are the guys and the girls who are doing the checks, the financial checks, and they are helping the committee to do investigation on the candidates. The reform goes very slow without a reformed Supreme Court of Justices, and also communication is key. This is something we have learned in the process, because you need a lot of support for this. For example, the Supreme Court of Justice is somehow blocked, which means that every person who has a case before the Supreme Court will have to wait a bit more, 6 or 12 months or even more. And this, of course, presses a challenging on the justice sector reform. Without having explaining this reform, why it is important, what are the benefits on the long term, the support from the people will not be high. And this is something which all of us as a society needs to understand, no matter where it stands. And there is a need of proactive communication on this reform. Before this was not really happening. Another lesson learned is, of course, that in case of Moldova, there was a need to disregard the conclusion of some state institutions. So, for example, a judge will come before this evaluation committee and will have a paper in hand that will say that I pay all my taxes before the fiscal authority, and this is a confirmation from the fiscal authority. Or there is a National Integrity Agency who checked my integrity some years ago and everything is fine. Usually each of these judges and prosecutors had such documents, but after doing some deeper investigation, the commission found otherwise. So somehow having a conclusions from authority is not should not be taken for granted. Now, last but not least, I will say a bit about the few risks which we see that Moldova entails. Because of the delay of the pre-vetting, as I was mentioning, all other reforms started in parallel, and now this divided attention, of course, possesses some challenges. This also sparked delays of the Supreme Court reform. There is lack of sufficient good national candidates for the vetting committee, and this needs to be taken into account. Like before jumping into such reforms, there needs to be a scoping missions of the people with high integrity who could do it, and also this should be taken into account also for international members. A high numbers of vacancies in the judiciary, so a lot of judges decided to leave, and this is somehow which we foresee will happen also not only at the level of the Supreme Court of Justice, but also at the level of the courts of appeal or the first instance court when the process is starting the full vetting. This should be taken into account because there will be high, and there is high pressure on the system because of the workload. So if we had 100 of judges doing some work, now we have 80 or 70s, and this is, of course, possesses a lot of a great challenge. That's about it. I wanted to mention that we are observing this reform. This is something which was never done in the past. We are somehow hopeful that this is something that Moldova requires back now, because other reforms which were less invasive proved to be less effective. This is why we very much hope Moldova will succeed. Of course, there are lessons learned in the process, and it is paramount that Moldova implements the Venice Commission recommendation and assures that such high risk legislation and mechanism will not reside in blocking the whole system. We are not in the end, we are just in the beginning, and perhaps in 2-3 years time we'll be more wiser than this, but this is how currently Moldova struggles to form a new elite, a new judiciary, which is independent, accountable, and it has all the reassurances to restore the trust in the judiciary that it has lost. I'll stop here, and maybe if you have any questions or comments when we have the chance, I will be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ili, for your very extensive and interesting presentation. I will just ask the questions after our presentations, or if you have Vatanopridon თუ არ გეჩქარებათ დისკუსიის დროს რომ დავსვათ კითხვები სამივე პრეზენტატორის შემდეგ.
მოგესალმებით, მე მექნებოდა ერთი კითხვა ფრიდონ ინჯია, საქართველოს პარლამენტის წევრი.
Here, Ili, can you change the language when the questions are, because the questions will be on Georgian. Diolch, დასვით ბატონო. გისმენთ ბატონო ფრიდონ, შეგიძლიათ დასვათ კითხვა.
კიდევ ერთხელ მოგესალმებით, მე მექნება ერთი კითხვა. ეფექტურობა რაში გამოიხატება ამ სასამართლო სისტემის ამ ხედვაში, თქვენს ამ კონცეფციაში, ამ მიღებულ გადაწყვეტილებებზე, ეფექტურობა როგორი იქნება, როგორ გამოიხატება, რაში გამოიხატება ეს ადამიანის უფლებების კონტექსტში საჩივრები თუ როგორ არის ეს საკითხი? დიდი მადლობა.
მადლობთ. Ili, will you answer this question? It's about the efficiency of the reforms, how it will be for the human rights, and what will be main points of the efficiency of their reforms.
Yeah.
Well, basically, one of the main indicators will be the trust in the judiciary, and for the last 10 years, it is less than 18%. Less than 50% even, and this is of course not a single indicator, but having these judges and prosecutor vetted, and having, for example, new members of the High Judicial Council which pass through this exercise, we have somehow an assurance that the decision they take on the selection and promotion will be transparent, will be more accountable, will be more better reasoned. But this is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. When it comes to other indicators, we of course will expect for the next year increase in the workload, but we also hope to have at the end of the road less arbitrary decision, less judgments of the European Court which say that it was because of this judges panel that Moldova was convicted at the European human rights. So a lot of long run decisions, a lot of long expected, but these are just the two of them.
Okay, thank you, Ili. I will just ask our participants to ask questions during the discussion if anyone is not hurry, and we have this section of discussions, and after we will have all questions together, and I will move on to our next speakers, also from Moldova. He is a member of our international network of judicial reformers, and we're very proud that Ion Guzun was recently appointed as a member of Superior Council of Magistracy, appointed by the Parliament of the Republic of Moldova. He is also the director of the Secretariat of the Independent Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee. Prior to that, he was chairman of the Pardoning Commission by the Presidency of the Republic of Moldova, vice chairman of the Amnesty International Moldova's Council, member of the administration board of the TVA channel and of the Legal Resources Center from Moldova. And between 2010 and 2021, he was legal advisor to the Legal Resources Center from Moldova. He was member of the Advisory Council for the Prevention of Torture, program assistant at the United Nations Development Program in Moldova, and provided his expertise to the European delegation to the Republic of Moldova, Council of Europe, World Bank, OSCE mission. So, Ion, the floor is yours, and please represent your speech.
Hello to everyone. And if I knew that you will read all these credentials, I would shorten that list. I do believe that many of those that are now connected have probably the same interesting experiences in your country. Before I will start, I just kindly ask you just to confirm if it is anyone from Greece, Romania, from Italy, Netherlands, Slovakia, or Slovenia? No, it's not. Okay, I will explain why did I ask about this. We are the first composition of the Superior Council of Magistracy that followed pre-vetting process. So what is called pre-vetting? Because it is dedicated for the members of the self-administration bodies of judges and prosecutors. In Moldova, the Superior Council of Magistracy is a separate body than for the prosecutors. I will speak more about the Superior Council of Magistracy. First, it is composed of 12 persons, 6 judges and 6 non-judges. However, at this moment, we are only 4 judges and 3 non-judges. Just recently, on Friday, the annual assembly of judges, following several of the challenges, they elected these members within the Superior Council of Magistracy. That process of pre-vetting and the number of candidates that the annual assembly of judges and also the parliament had to select was very interesting. Why? Because as Lee mentioned earlier, within judges, if you speak just only about judges, were 28 candidates which applied, and finally only 5 passed the pre-vetting process. And also among non-judges, we were 12 non-judges, and finally Parliament decided to appoint 3 out of 6. So this process was interesting from many of perspectives. I will give you 2 feedbacks from judges' side, where some situation when judges didn't know that actually their peers have more wealth that they declared. Somebody claimed that, oh, I have the income only from the salary to salary and no more. And actually what the public pre-vetting process shown is that actually some of them have more money and incomes. Another was the issue that I really liked, because it was referred how a judge is competing for the Superior Council of Magistracy, while when she had to examine some cases related to the bad conditions in places of detention, she postponed the hearings after the deadline that law was provided. And what is interesting here is that although that judge was subject to disciplinary procedure, although the Superior Council of Magistracy applied warning as a disciplinary measure, finally she appealed before court, and the court said that this is not because of judge's intention. all those delayed happened. In comparison, the pre-vetting commission decided that actually this is the breach of human rights, because all those inmates had the right that their case to be examined within 3 months since they appealed or contested, and judge delayed to deliver justice in their case. So these discrepancies for myself shown that we have to have a different view of what the Superior Council of Magistracy is or has to be. Only 2 days ago, we had the first sitting of the Superior Council of Magistracy, and we already had some of the challenges about our presence and future, but we will go through it with some of the examples. What is the most important is that this moment, the Superior Council of Magistracy has to increase not only the standards, but also to show that it has credibility and reacts promptly. In this composition, we already reacted to 2 public declarations, statements of politicians. And what is interesting is that only me and my colleague, which are lawyers, so non-lawyers, actually reacted to threats that politicians said publicly. And I think that this changes a lot. We try to show that we as non-judges, we are part of the judicial system of the Superior Council of Magistracy, and we will react anytime when the judiciary or justice in general or judges are under this kind of the scrutiny. One of the challenges, how we started being only 3 non-judges and 1 judge with an expired mandate. And there were many of debates among, let's say, law community here, whether we can or not decide or conduct the SCM sittings. And but all these, let's say, rumors were actually had no background because the law says that actually, if we are at least 3, we can hold the sittings of the Superior Council of Magistracy. But for sure, we cannot decide on anything which is related to the judge's career. Another challenge for myself was to organize the contest to temporary transfer of judges from a lower court to the Supreme Court of Justice. I will not repeat what Ilya earlier mentioned, but just to give you a few data, is that in 2 months, 80% of judges resigned from office, Supreme Court judges. And the Superior Council of Magistracy had to react promptly because there are several of cases that are under the Supreme Court of Justice mandate and actually cannot be delayed. This is related mostly to the conflict of interests, or we already have some cases that are examined in a appellate order or the first instance court, the Supreme Court of Justice, and the appeals which were made against the decisions of the pre-vetting commission. So the candidates that failed to promote the evaluation. So now we ready to transfer 7 judges to the Supreme Court of Justice for a short term. It's 6 months. I mean, until when all these processes will be changed. For myself, was a really challenge, a challenge for several perspectives. I have seen that my peers were not ready for such big decisions. They were not well prepared, but don't tell them, please. That will be a Chattanooga's issue. But that also shown that judges among themselves, they do not know their peers, their experiences, their good or bad decisions that were issued. But this is very important when it's a matter of judges' career. Before starting this process, we've asked several of the entities, the National Anti-Corruption Center, the Prosecution the Office of the Prosecutor General and the Intelligence Service and any relevant institution to provide the Superior Council of Magistracy with any relevant information towards each of the candidates, and we received no one. However, what the SCM decided, from my point of view, was very good, with one exception. But as I used to say, it's to have one Taliban versus one Christian in this composition. This is not the biggest fail. We just started to work. We will learn many things. So I'm optimistic. The issues that I see for this short term and the next one is that we have many reforms, systemic reforms, with regard to the judiciary. Many reforms and changes of institutions in the criminal procedure code. We have all these changes which are promoted in a short time. And Eli mentioned earlier about the anti-corruption specialized court. We have many resignation from office from among judges and also the court clerks. So having all this together, having no salary increasement, I think that now the risks are much higher when all these reforms started. Why? Because we can now promote the laws to be implemented, yes, to have the pre-vetting process, to have vetting process, to have a good law on the Supreme Court of Justice, but we may face with the situation that to have no candidates to the Supreme Court of Justice. We may have no clerks to help judges to work and to fulfill their duties. And last 2 weeks, I was involved in some discussions with regard to the competencies of the anti-corruption courts, and the issues are much higher. For example, we would like to have all these courts. I mean, there are more details of this, but let's say this is the political decision. But what will be the salaries of judges? Will be the same or different? If it is different, I mean higher in comparison with the other judges, will be seen this as an discrimination or not? And this is also applicable to the secretariat staff. So at this moment, we have in the judicial system, we have about 100, I can't tell you the exact number, but about 100 of vacancies. But this is also including those numbers of judges that were on maternity leave or this temporary suspension from office. However, we do have a registry, a public registry of the candidates that would like to compete for to fill in the vacancies for judges. I do believe that this may be our say, because all these candidates are coming from the current clerks from courts, current or former prosecutors, judges, or attorneys. However, we have to increase all these standards and not to repeat the big issues that we had previously, to mime the interviews, to mime the checks of the candidates, and so far and so on. But for all these of the procedures, we will need the responsibility also from the other state institutions. Yes, and one of the other challenges because we speak about the vacancies, is that the Superior Council of Magistracy has to select and appoint a judge to the Constitutional Court. So all these challenges that I've mentioned is just from now until 3 months. So having all these big reforms, big changes, and huge number of the vacancies to fill in to all court levels, having weak staff, not unprofessional, but weak, it means from understaffed and with low salaries, some of them have not such a good expertise in the needed field. So that's, I mean, from this perspective. But we rely on the helpful from our donor support and also from the civil society organizations, although they are few. So although I was not asked, but I will mention about the member of the parliament that previously asked my colleague Eli about the effectiveness. I think that the effectiveness may be seen only from the speed of the laws that will be adopted, about probably feedback from the Venice Commission, probably the feedback from the Constitutional Court, because some of the laws are appealed before the Constitutional Court. But I'm really afraid of the effectiveness, but rather delays to fill in the vacancies, to promise at least court clerks that in 6 months or 1 year, your salaries will be increased, and some issues with regard to the judicial map, but this is a different topic. I mean, but I would rather stick to these big reforms. Yes, in the Criminal Procedure Code, new law on Supreme Court of Justice, and challenges with regard to the vacancies within the judiciary. So this is shortly about the. Yes, and I forgot that within this 1 month, I already raised, at least I noticed the judicial inspection about the conduct of the Supreme Court Justice, the Annual Assembly of Judges. So I'm efficient from this perspective.
Thank you very much, Ion. It was very interesting intervention, and I want to inform you that our meetings are recording, and we will send this our meeting to this participant from Armenia and all the countries you have assumed to be here, because it will be very interesting for them. This very interesting information from today. And now we have third speaker, Julian Groza. Julian is an expert in foreign policy, European policy and public administration. He worked as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Moldova, leading the direction of European integration. Before, Julian held several positions, including the post of General Director of the European Integration Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he worked in Brussels with the representation of the Republic of Moldova to the EU. And currently, Julian is the Executive Director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms, a non-profit organization and independent research and analysis center founded by a team of national and international experts, former government officials, civil servants, public and career diplomats. So, Julian, the floor is yours, and we will listen your intervention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm honored to speak at the end of this session after two brilliant presentations, very detailed presentations made by my colleagues, Ili and Ion, with whom we work very closely. So I'll also try to be brief and leave some room for Q&As and discussion if needed. And I just wanted to point out, I've been asked to refer a bit on the role of civil society in supporting the justice sector reform and overall the EU accession process of Moldova. So this is exactly what I'll try to do now. From my introduction, you saw that I have a background in civil service for about 11 years, and I'm also a career diplomat. I was closely involved in a series of processes linked to the reforms, including the justice sector. while negotiating the association agreement with the EU, but also during the visa dialogue with the EU. But after I left the civil service, I decided to continue to deal with reforms, but more from the non-state actor perspective, and trying to use all the experience and knowledge I managed to accumulate in the public service to try also to help to increase also our contributions from the civil society perspective. So this is why we try to focus on 3 dimensions mainly. Of course, we do monitoring of public policies, and we do it together with our peers, other organizations, well-established think tanks and research centers, including with the Legal Resource Center here represented by Ilya. Just recently, we published a shadow report assessing evaluating the conditions put forward by the Commission to start accession negotiations, 9 of them. You can also check the report. I'll leave it in the chat. It's available also in an interactive way, so you can go into more details to see where we stand. We also published some reports previously overall on how Moldova is doing on EU implementation of the association agreement, and the justice sector reform and anti-corruption effort is something which, of course, was always a priority in the conditionalities from the EU. So you'll find that also in our reports, shadow reports on association implementation. Second, what we try to do, we try to be more active in terms of policy proposals, policy development, and I can just name 2 most recent experiences we had with our colleagues from the think tank community here in Moldova. First is the vetting concept. I see Halia here. We discussed at length before starting the pre-vetting exercise in Moldova about the vetting. We looked at the Ukrainian experience a lot. We look at Albanian experience a lot. So we try to to help to conceptualize the process from the very beginning. It was not easy, because it was a lot of resistance also, not only from within the system, but also from politicians at various stages, but also from the EU as well. Because again, a vetting process is basically a technique of transitional justice, and it's extraordinary measure reform. You need to be convinced, and you need to convince all stakeholders that this is exactly what it is needed, but also you need to take a lot of effort to make sure that to ensure the balance. This is exactly what we try to look at in terms of making sure that the stakeholders, meaning the government, is taking into account this balance between the need to conduct this reform, but also try to respect the basic norms, and make sure that everything that Venice Commission is putting forward in assessing these types of reform process is transposed as much as possible into the legislation in the process. So the second most recent experience is just to give an example. Last year, we've been quite active in trying to look at how to make the anti-corruption prosecutor office more efficient, responding to its main mission, which is fighting high-level corruption. So basically, we work very closely with this institution, and we conduct a feasibility study on this institution, and we did it with, by the way, with an Ukrainian expert, Vitaly Kasko. Very detailed piece of work with very concrete recommendations, and we try actually to support the implementation of these recommendations to our extent, but also in doing this policy development effort. Of course, we try to be very active in terms of advocacy, and this is why we're quite active in using multi-stakeholder interactions to make sure that all relevant stakeholders are on board throughout the process, and making sure that these policy proposals and interventions, be it vetting or be it the reform of anti-corruption prosecutor office, for example, benefits not only from the support, but also is assisted in implementation. So that's just briefly on this main roles that I see important, at least from our perspective. And of course, just to conclude, I think where we see that civil society and think tank community in particular have an added value in the reform process. And here, the justice sector reform is one of the examples. And Ilya already went into details to show you the challenges and the context. It is important to mention that many of the reform initiatives that have been implemented here in Moldova have been scrutinized and developed with the support of civil society organizations. And at the same time, Ion here is a member of the Supreme Council of Magistrates today, but again, this is another expression of how civil society can be more active, going beyond, policies and monitoring, but taking more active, positions in institutions to, to implement the reform from within the system. And I'm very happy that Ion is there as a non-layman, as a non-judge, as a lay member in the Supreme Council of Magistrates, because now the Supreme Council of Magistrates will have a crucial role in the next phases of the reform of the justice sector, the reform of the Supreme Court of Justice, but more importantly, the full vetting. So I'll stop here, and I'll be more than happy to try to provide additional probably insights based on your interest and based on your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian, for this very interesting speech. Really, civil society's role is important in these reforms and judicial reforms, and we have some problems during the process of summer when it was making amendments to the draft law about the judicial system. And I think that really it is important that civil society have to be involved in this process. Thank you very much. And now we will go to the discussion part, and I will ask our audience to raise hands and ask questions. Now I can see Kaha is raising hand, and you can ask question, Kaha. And also Mr. Pridon, after I will give you the floor.
Hello everyone. I'm Kaha Tsikarishvili, so I'm a member of the group of independent lawyers. First of all, thank you very much for these excellent presentations. We are very much interested in Moldova's experience because we have many similarities, and Georgia is also on the way of EU integration. So we have many common problems and challenges, and it's very nice to share those experiences. Now, let me ask a question about judicial corporativism. How did the judiciary and judges respond to these reforms, particularly when it comes to the vetting? Did you have some kind of a corporate resistance from the judges? This is the question number one. The question number two was, basically, my question is about, do you have this problem of judicial corporativism, like judges covering judges? And do you have some kind of elite corruption, where there is some kind of a group sitting on the top of the judiciary and just trying to control the lower court judges, especially especially the court presidents, through the court presidents, and also through other channels of administration, which is very common in Eastern European countries. Another question would be about judicial corruption. Did you have, you said that you had allegations of corruption previously, and my question is whether the prosecutor's office has investigated those allegations which existed about judicial corruptions. Because here in Georgia, for example, we have a prosecutor's office which is completely inactive. There is a Supreme Court judge who said that I was proposed a bribe from the State Security Service. And there is a State Security Service, former chief of the State Security Service, like Deputy Chief of the State Security Service. He said that, yes, we proposed the bribe to the judge. So we have two persons. One is a judge, one is a former judge who said, yes, I was proposed a bribe. And another person who says, yes, we proposed the bribe. But the prosecutor's office is not doing anything, no investigation. And now the opposition has demanded the creation of a special investigative committee from the parliament. But the majority party, they are blocking the investigation of the corruption allegations. I will also tell you the four judges, actually 3 judges and 1 former judge has been sanctioned by the United States for the involvement in the judicial corruption. And so now we have a situation where the opposition is trying to create the investigative commission, and the government and the ruling party is blocking the investigative commission, but we have the facts of corruption. So how do you treat those facts? I mean, what are the exactly sources where you prove judicial corruption, and how does the investigation work right now, the investigation of judicial corruption? Which agency you mentioned something like a special anti-corruption prosecutor's office. How do they work when it comes to the judges? So these are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaha. I think Ili will answer, yes.
I will start, but I know for sure that especially you won, but maybe also Julian has some add-on to say. Is there judiciary corporativism? Of course. And maybe one will delve a bit more, but just to illustrate with an example, the General Assembly of Judges, they refused to appoint their members to the Superior Council of Magistracy because they didn't have their candidates on the list. Their candidate did not pass this pre-vetting exercise. This is why they used it as an excuse that they need to do some sort of a public declaration, and they will postpone the General Assembly of Judges. Is there judicial corporativism? Of course, yes, if you look at the past results when it comes to judicial accountability. So we had 1,000 complaints at the judicial inspection and only 24 decisions of this judicial inspection, which means in practice that judges are covering judges when it comes to breaches of legislation or some abuses. Of course, some of the complaints are ill-founded, but this high number of complaints versus number of decisions on judges' discipline is showcasing a sort of corporativism. I will, of course, you will know in more details this, but is there a group controlling judges? It was at least before 2019, and actually this report of the International Commission of Jurists states that there are a few group of judges who basically are making amends on how their colleagues must proceed. And actually, I was talking in the beginning about the laundromat. Basically, through the justice system, billions of dollars were laundered, and some of the judges who were later investigated of this said they received a call from the court presidents, and the court president received a call from the high justice who said that you can do it and nothing bad will happen to you. So we have witness examples of this hierarchy and judicial corporativism. Is there judicial corruption? Very interesting question. On paper there is, however, we don't know of a judge who is irrevocably convicted of corruption. We had some judges even in taking red-handed with corruption. They went into the court and they were judged by their colleagues, also a sign of judicial corruption. And in case of the majority of them, statute of limitation has expired before the court has reached a final verdict, or the High Supreme Court will send the case for retrial for 2 or 3 times, and then the statute of limitation will expire. And last but not least, we had this huge scandal on the laundromat, and 14 judges were indicted. One of them deceased. One of them is flee the country and is in the United States, and the rest of them were acquitted by their peers, or two of them were convicted, but the statute of limitation have expired. And this also illustrates that you have this pervasive level of corruption, but no convictions when it comes to a judge. We also have illicit enrichment charges, but these are also in the court, and there is no final verdict there. There is this agency, the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, who is in charge of investigating judges if they take bribes. However, I must say that we have a very new leadership back there, also because of the lack of efficiency of this institution. And so far, a year in the office, we are starting to see at least some cases initiated. However, no verdicts yet. And I will stop here, and maybe if my colleagues want to complement and comment. Thank you.
I hope what Ilya mentioned. I just would like to stress also the following. That's about the corporativism. It is shown by different rules or signs or events. First is how the evaluation process was mimed. So how the Supreme Council of Magistracy and how the evaluation board or selection board or even the disciplinary board mimed the judges' behavior or even activity before 2019. Why before 2019? Because since that time until now, many of bodies of the Supreme Council of Magistracy worked with an expired mandate, or they just didn't function due to the fact that judges were not appointed, or the other processes were implemented or entered into force. For example, the pre-vetting process. Another corporativism is how all these members of the Supreme Council of Magistracy and members of boards until 2019 worked. Many times they just worked, and by promoting not based on merit, or they were sanctioned also not based on merit. And all this issue created a situation that judges didn't trust to the Supreme Council of Magistracy and its boards, and the boards and the SCM did what they thought that they have to do. So that was lack of trust from among judges within the Supreme Council of Magistracy, was almost no communication between the Supreme Council of Magistracy and the parliament, the presidency, and the government. So everybody in this relationship was independent. They did what they want or thought to do, but was the worst moments, as far as I understand, in the justice sector. And having lack of communication, lack of trust, many of lost moments, and having one of the lowest trust in the judiciary, and having now on the top priority on justice reforms, priority on anti-corruption from the parliament and government and European Union integration, I think that these levels are too high, is too big, this difference. And by appointing on temporary transfer of judges to the Supreme Court of Justice, from my point of view, was a test for us as a member of the Superior Council of Magistracy to show everyone that we do have interviews, public interviews. Our interviews are based on merits, and we really ask questions about the judge's career and not how it was previously. And about the corruption in the judiciary, I have just not to save the time, I included here 2 reports of the Independent Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee. And about what you have mentioned, Kaja, about sanctions of United States against few judges from Georgia, that was very good. As far as I know, some NGOs did work with the Treasury of the US Treasury to include somehow all these persons in these sections, because we see that towards some of the former politicians, it works. It works because all this justice, to deliver justice and to be prosecutor persons in any country, it takes a long time. And the Moldova has to guarantee all these rights before a court, but when such sanctions helps, they help a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ili, Ion. I've seen the hands raised. Mr. Jim, please, after Halia and Mr. Fridon. Jim.
So I think Mr. Fridon was first. I don't want to take his place.
კი ბატონო.
მოგესალმებით კიდევ ერთხელ. ძალიან საინტერესო პრეზენტაცია იყო. გესმით ჩემი?
კი გვესმის ბატონო Fridon. Can you hear the translation, Ion and Ilian? Okay. კი გვესმის.
ძალიან საინტერესო პრეზენტაცია იყო და ჩემთვის ძალიან შთამბეჭდავი იყო ის, რასაც თქვენ აკეთებთ. ეხლა საქართველოში რაც ხდებოდა, მე მახსოვს 97 წლიდან დაიწყო სასამართლო რეფორმა და სულ რეფორმაში ვარ. უკვე მალე იქნება 30 წელი რეფორმა. მოვიდა 2003 წელს ახალი ხელისუფლება, პრაქტიკულად ყველა მოსამართლეები შეიცვალა. მიუხედავად ამისა, უკმაყოფილება და საჩივრები სტრასბურგში ათასობით მოვიდა შემდეგ ხელისუფლება. ეს შემცირდა რაოდენობა საჩივრების და ნაკლებია სასამართლო სისტემაში, მაგრამ ერთი რამ არის, პროკურატურაში დევს ათასობით საქმე, რომელსაც არ იხილავენ. მე მაინც მექნება კითხვა, თქვენთან არ ვიცი ვინ მიპასუხებს. მე დაუბრუნდები ამ ეთილსინდისიერების საბჭოს, ძალიან საინტერესოა ეგ. მაინტერესებს შემოწმების პროცედურა და უფლებამოსილება ამ საბჭოს წევრების. რა უფლებამოსილებით ისინი მიმართავენ და მოიძიებენ ამ საკითხებს. ეს ერთი. მეორე, სისტემის ეფექტიანობა ეს ყველაზე მთავარია და მე გეთანხმებით იმაში, თუ მოსახლეობა, ქვეყნის მოსახლეობა კმაყოფილი იქნება, ეგ არის ყველაზე მთავარი. რომ ქვეყნის მოსახლეობა ნდობა აქვს სასამართლოს და თუ ეს გამოკითხვით ხდება, ვინ აკეთებს ამ გამოკითხვას, ან რა მეთოდიკით ხდება და რამდენად საადვილო იქნება ეს გამოკითხვა. თუ რამოდენიმე გამოკითხვა ხდება და მე საშუალო გამოვხატ, რომ აი მოსახლეობა მაინც ენდობა. მესამე კითხვა, აუცილებელი იყო თუ არა ამ კითილსინდისიერების საბჭოში უცხოელების მონაწილეობა. მე ასე გავიგე 23 არის ადგილობრივი ქვეყნის მოსახლეობა, 3 არის უცხოელები. ეს რამდენად არის სხვა ქვეყნის ჩართება სასამართლო სისტემაში. რატომ იქ არ მოიძებნებოდა ეს 6 კაცი თუ 5 კაცი, რომელიც აი ანდა იმათი შერჩევა როგორ მოხდა ამ 3 ადამიანის ქვეყნიდან, ან იმ კიდევ 3 ადამიანის როგორ არის ეგა და რამდენად დაცულია მოსამართლეების მიმართ იმისი უფლებების დაცვა. ინდაც იმათი, ვინც ახლა დაირჩიეთ. ჩვენთან ჩვენს კონსტიტუციაში არის 63 მუხლი, სადაც არის ასეთი ჩანაწერი. არავის არ აქვს უფლება მოსთხოვოს მოსამართლეს ანგარიში კონკრეტულ საქმეს. ანდა უკვე საქმეზე, რომელიც უნდა დამთავრდეს. ბათილია ყველა აქტი, რომელიც ზღუდავს მოსამართლეების დამოუკიდებლობას. აი, დამოუკიდებლობა როგორ არის აქ? გამოდის რომ არ ვიცი, აი რა, ეგეც ერთ-ერთი მთავარი ის არის, მოსამართლე იყოს დამოუკიდებელი. მაგრამ ის რაც სისტემა თქვენ იმასკენ კეთილსინდისიების საბჭო და იქ ეს მოძიება საკითხების, ეს მაინტერესებს, თუმცა ის მონაცემები და ის გადაწყვეტილება ალბათ ძალიან საინტერესოა. საკმაოდ აი ასეთი რომ ერთხელ მომხდარიყო 50 წლის განმავლობაში და დამთავრებული იყო, მერე შემდეგი ეტაპი იქნებოდა სუფთა და სუფთა, უკვე ნაკლებად იქნებოდა საჭირო კეთილსინდისიერების საბჭო, რაღაც ფორმალური შეიძლებოდა ყოფილიყო. დიდი მადლობა.
Madloba ბატონო ფრიდონ. I will ask our speakers to answer.
Thank you very much. I'll go first in case colleagues would want to complement. So on basis of what power does the vetting committee act? It has a special law voted by the majority of the parliament. It is not a constitutional amendment, but an organic law. Yeah.
It's clear. Okay. According to the law, yes.
Yes. Yes. And by this law, it also entails that this vetting commission has access to every public institution. So, for example, if I need the information for the tax service, then this commission has direct access to the database of the. This is how it gathers. Yes. How we measure trust? How we measure trust? There are certain national surveys which are done on annual basis, and they include how much you trust the public authorities and judiciary included. This is done for more than 20 years. It is called Barometer of Public Opinion, and it's steady from the 2002 up until now. It happens in March and in November, with some exceptions, but on annual basis, you have the same question asked to the people. Of course, there are also other independent surveys which are done either by international institution like NDI or IRI, International Republican Institute. You also have local surveys, and usually the data is somehow similar with a bit of discrepancies, but this is basically how we measure it. Why it was necessary to have 3 foreigners? I don't have the full answer to that, but my guess is that in Moldova, at least, everybody knows everyone, and there are somehow this thing that if you get someone who is not involved, someone independent, and someone who has high reputation of doing some great things abroad, the legitimacy of the process is higher, because usually on the national candidates you will say, this is in the pocket of some party. If you have internationals which are not paid by the state budgets, they are paid from the development partners, that the legitimacy of the process is somehow different. And actually, for example, we have one person from an American citizens, we have former Georgian judge at the Strasbourg court in this preventing committee. And we also have a Dutch judge, and also 3 members from the nationals who are, some of them are former judges. And about the safeguards, of course, there are safeguards in the law for the judges. So the verdict of the preventing committee will not mean that they will lose their job, or a negative opinion. It does not violate the, let's say, the right of the judge to currently serve. And the burden of proof is split. First, the commission needs to prove that there are some questions with regard to the assets or with regard to the ethics, and then the judge has all the avenues to respond. He has the rights to be heard by the committee. He has the rights to submit additional information. He has the right to, and the most important thing in terms of due process, he has the right to challenge this decision before the Supreme Court of Justice. So you have judicial control. Of course, this is different with the full vetting if the judge will lose his or her job, but this is something which we need to entail further. So far as we know, there is a standard set by the European Court in a case before Croatia about this exercise of evaluation, and the standards in the Moldovan mechanism is out of that judgment. So I will send the judgments in the chat. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ili. And Jim, if you don't mind, I will give to ask questions. Yeah, she was also asking a question before. Okay, Halia, please.
Thank you, Kata, and thank you, Jim, for giving the floor to me. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's so nice to see you, and especially Moldovan colleagues. Thank you very much for your presentations. Very interesting and informative. I have a question, I guess, to Ilya and Julian with regards to what is your assessment of international involvement? Since you already have the first outcomes of the reform, do you think it was justified, and what are your lessons learned from having international experts involved in preventing? And my second question, with regards to this idea of establishment of anti-corruption court in Moldova, as far as I understand, you are not in support of that idea, but what are your arguments against that? It's just because it will be a big burden on the budget, or there are other reasons why you are against that? So we'll be very happy to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Halia.
Maybe Julian, we want to start first, because I'm like monopolizing the floor. I don't want to do that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just briefly refer to your questions. First, very great to see you too. On the international experts, I think the experience we had with international experts is that their participation was very important for the credibility part of the whole process. Because if you look at the local representatives in the pre-vetting committee, then you'd hear the most kind of criticism from the judges themselves, and less to the internationals, which indicates a bit of, still the low level of trust by the stakeholders to the locals for various reasons. And I think it was a good idea to have this split, this mix of these kind of international locals. It also ensured a kind of an inclusive and more balanced result of the pre-vetting. On the negative side, well, it's too strong to say negative side, but still, the part which I think was observed throughout the process, that as it was for the first time that this exercise was happening in Moldova, of course, this committee tried to learn from the experiences and so on and so forth, but still they had to go through their own due process. And I think the fact that I think internationals had an important role to make sure that dedicate more than enough time, I would say, to the whole evaluation process. And I think that is because it took more time to understand the whole process for the internationals. I probably think so. But that's my kind of interpretation of some of the criticisms that I heard from various stakeholders towards the committee. But overall, my opinion, I think I think it was great, and I think the fact that for the second committee, the vetting committee did the same will be respected. The same approach will be respected. It's an indicator that I think the experience of the pre-vetting was a positive one. On the anti-corruption court, I will be brief here because Ilya has referred already to it. My initial reaction to this proposal was, come on, guys. Politically, it's an important kind of promise of the president as well, and of the governing party in their program back in 2021. I have seen it as a priority in the governing program. They put it on hold because they had to prioritize the reform actions, and also the idea was not fully endorsed with the arguments in the existing system. But the fact that pre-vetting took a bit longer made the president mainly, but other governmental stakeholders uneasy. Because the pressure of the result was huge, both from the public, but also their own kind of expectations from the whole process, and they wanted a bit to fast track. And also, it has to be mentioned that the proposal for the anti-corruption court proposed by the president came after the failed attempt of the General Assembly to appoint judges in the SCM. So that was basically a reaction. And it was actually a reaction with a clear signal to the system that if you don't, cooperate and you don't engage in the process, then we'll have to come up with additional kind of reform measures to target corruption in the system, in particular in the justice system. So that was the context in which the initiative was proposed. Now, I know that there was a working group created by the president that it also involves civil society representatives. Ilya and Ilya's organization, our organization, have been invited to the process. So I have not the chance to look into the first discussions. But my initial proposal was that instead of looking into setting up a new anti-corruption court, maybe it makes sense to look into setting up specialized committees of judges, specialized panels of judges. And I think that is something which should be subject to kind of feasibility assessment, kind of ex ante assessment to see what's more feasible. Is it to create a new anti-corruption court, or is it more feasible to create the panel of judges on anti-corruption? That's, I think, which I understand now is the way to go for this working group. They're looking into this feasibility. And I heard and I feel that there is some room for, to open a bit the perspective on this initiative. And it may happen that if it will be more feasible to set up a panel of judges in the current setup, without going into very complex amendments to setting up this anti-corruption court, because when you talk about anti-corruption court, you also have to talk about the whole, system, because it's not only the court, but also it's the appeal and so on and so forth. So it's more complex. The deadline set by the president, I mean, at least recommended by the president, was 3 months. Initially, I said it's not realistic. It will not happen in 3 months. And the second reserve I had is that as we are in the process of pre-vetting and we will engage into vetting of the Supreme Court of Justice, as long as the new SCM is not fully, functional, it will be very difficult for the new SCM to take that responsibility, because what the idea was with the creation of anti-corruption court is that it will be done in parallel with the pre-vetting and vetting exercise, which means that SCM, the new SCM, the current SCM, which now is more functional with judges on board as well, not fully, but still they have 2/3, which is already legitimate. The burden on the creation of this court and the responsibility for the whole process will be on the new SCM members. But when looking at the new SCM members, we have to look at the system within the SCM, because now we also have to talk about the appointment and selection boards, which are currently being reformed. An institution would have to help SCM members to do, the selection process, more or less comparable with the vetting. But that is a challenge. Well, now the SCM members have, in a way, tested that, appointing delegated judges to the Supreme Court of Justice. But that's something temporary. But when we talk about anti-corruption court, it's something which should be more sustainable. And then it's not only the process, it's also the budgeting and also the persons who will be on that court. Exactly. So I'll stop here. But it's an ongoing process. What it is clear is that we will have a finality on that. Either we will have a panel of judges, either we'll have an anti-corruption court with the whole system. But that we will know probably in the next 2 months or so.
Thank you.
Just very, very briefly on the last point, if you do the full vetting, perhaps you don't need an anti-corruption court, because the reason is the same. The fact that the president wants the anti-corruption court is the fact that she doesn't trust the judges. So having scarce resources, maybe it's more reasonable either to full vet or to do the panels, as Julian mentioned. And the role of the internationals, I fully subscribe to what Julian said, but also to add up that on the downsides, it's very difficult to explain to a judge from the Netherlands why someone is sending money from Italy without a bank transfer. Why? So a lot of peculiar regional reasons who are known to Moldovans, but very difficult to explain to an international. So there are some cultural shifts which it will take longer and international members to understand. This is not exactly a downside, but a thing which slows up the process. And I'm not talking about tax declaration, which for some more established European country, this is like a given, but not in Moldova. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Halia. So, Jim, we're listening to you.
Great, thank you very much. So first, congratulations to the three of you for the roles that you have played in what appear to me to be very bold and promising reforms. And not only the three of you, of course, but to the parliament that has adopted these reforms, and to the Moldovan voting public who elected that parliament. These things had to have happened before you could be in the position where the three of you were playing the roles that you are today. So all the way back down the line, congratulations. I have what I think is a fairly short question. If I understood correctly, I think you said, Ilya, that in the process of the pre-vetting, as the pre-vetting was happening, 80% of the Supreme Court has resigned. If I understood it correctly, at least. I fully see the human capital problems that this has created, and you know, again, congratulations on creative solutions to place some judges in the Supreme Court on short terms to try to solve some of the human capital problems. But I'm going to ask you a question about the 80% who resigned and the 20% who stayed. Even though there have been no proceedings of any kind involving the 80% who left, we often know or have an idea, a pretty strong idea, who are the good judges, the good, honest judges, who are the more corrupt ones. So my question is, are you happy about the 80% who left and happy about the 20% who stayed? Because if you are, this is a most striking, amazing result of the pre-vetting, that this kind of productive, perhaps, turnover could happen in a particular court, here the Supreme Court, as a result of one of these reforms. So I'm curious, are you happy about the 80% who left and the 20% who stayed?
I cannot, as a member of the Supreme Council of Magistracy, I can tell you that having 80% of judges leaving the Supreme Court of Justice, that means that there will be less work for the vetting commission. First. Second, some of them that left the office, they have a very, let's say, in their CV, you may find many of the CHR cases where they participated as judges. So not all of them that have left the system are good ones. Second, some of them left the system, unfortunately, but because being pressed of the other, because they were threatened by their peers not to stay in office. And due to the lack of communication with judges, describing about the timeline of the reforms, some potential consequences that they may face, and about those 20%. Yes, among those 20%, there are some judges that have to leave the system and to be in that part of 80%. But the time will come up. My issue as the member of the Supreme Council of Magistracy now is to see whether how to speed up the process to ensure the Supreme Court of Justice can work, but in the same time, having many vacancies in the system, not to create problems in a district court or in a court of appeals when I decide to transfer a judge, because usually in some courts, the workload is very high, and although judges are good, I cannot permit for myself to resolve problems in the Supreme Court of Justice and to make delays in the appellate court or the district court. But my view is that cases can be weighted at the Supreme Court, because, you know, it's the last instance. If people gone through all the system from district court, court of appeals, 2, 3, or even 4 years, they can wait one more year. So this is just a pragmatic, this view in this respect, not to respect the human rights, but this is just a pragmatic view of the current situation that we face. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to briefly follow up.
Okay.
The result of the proportion basically confirms once again how important was the decision to start with the pre-vetting as an extraordinary measure, just to confirm that this, and that ratio is very much not only with the judges who left from the Supreme Court of Justice, but that ratio is, as Ilya has mentioned, is a ratio of the pre-vetting result of the commission. So just a reconfirmation that it was needed. And just briefly, one point I wanted to mention. We have 3 challenges now. It's the capacity of the system as such. Because if we transpose the ratio of 80 to 20 to 410 judges, It means that, in principle, if the same standards would be applied as the pre-vetting to the whole judges in the system will collapse. This is why the decision was to split the process in 3 phases. The first is pre-vetting, which has the highest standards of assessment, because they are the body to deal with the system. The standards for the vetting process will be different a bit, or a bit lower than the one for the members of the Supreme Council of Magistrates. But as Ili mentioned, the reform of the Supreme Court of Justice is now the next step, and I think is also very important. But we don't know at this stage today how long, first, when the vetting will start, and how long the vetting will take. We have some limitations, at least in terms of risks. This government majority has less than 2 years ahead to activate in a comfortable environment, meaning that they have the government, the president, and the parliament on the same board, and they all are pro-reform, and they all oriented with all support coming from EU, US in this process. So it's important to see if in 2 years' time it will be realistic enough for the full vetting to take place. It's very unlikely that in the next 2 years' time this full vetting will take place. So this is why I think it is important that the process was split in 3. And I think as we have now the pre-vetting finalizing, or at least bringing first results with the new SCM becomes a new actor, a reanimated actor, a pro-reform actor, and a partner of reform at one for the whole system. But also it solves the issue of trust of the system towards the body, because Jon has mentioned about that. So now you have a new kind of regenerated kind of body, not fully completed, but still functioning today. And here the main role will be with the new SCM to start to play a more important role in the process. And final aspect I want to mention is the trust of the remaining people, judges in the system, in the reform process, meaning also the trust in the government and in the new SCM. Because this is the most affected part. There is huge, low level of trust among from the judges to the government for different reasons. There was a lot of speculations. There was a lot of fights. There was little kind of mini judges working for different oligarchs before, now operating on their own and acting like little barons there, creating intrigues, a lot of manipulation and disinformation. But now I think we also passed that a bit as the new assembly of judges took place. I think there was a different quality of it. And also the judges who have been silent before that are more vocal. And I think that is an indicator that also the system understands that it's much better to be, involved in the process and supporting the process than being out of it. And that is also relevant for the government. I think they are now more aware of the need to engage more and more SCM and the judges in the final step of the reform, because on that will depend how it will end. Final aspect is the new blood in the system, and this is why I think the work of the National Institute of Judges is crucial to prepare the new judges, because we have this institution which is preparing the new judges and prosecutors, and they have some capacities now in terms of producing new potential candidates. And this will be, I think, one of the next preoccupation in terms of enhancing the capacity of this institution to prepare new judges for the system.
Thank you, Julian. Jon has to leave our meeting. He has some very important meeting also. And thank you so much, Ion, for your participation, for this excellent speech, and looking forward to our future collaboration. Thank you so much. So I see Eka also has raised a hand and wants to ask a question. Please, Eka.
Thank you. Hello again, everyone. If there is no one wishing to ask questions, then I will take this opportunity. I feel as a host here, so that's why I'm trying to give opportunity to others. I would like, first of all, to share my little observation and then maybe ask only one question so that not to take much of your time. I feel a little bit small regret here, because what you describe is happening in Moldova. It's nothing similar to what is happening in Georgia in terms of judiciary reforms. While we have so similar situations in terms of what European Commission recommended to both of the countries, in terms of what are the contexts and what is the history of our judiciaries, that we both countries need full-scale, very comprehensive reforms, and trust towards the judiciary is very low. And when I think that in Georgia sometimes there is this argument that Georgia also deserved candidate status while we were not granted one. Now I see that how much more effort is done in Moldova. However, with challenges, of course, nobody denies, and it's very natural that there will be challenges. But effort is there, which is very important, and nothing similar is happening in Georgia. This is just to highlight the importance that Georgian authorities should pay attention to. The question I would like to ask is, because this is also very important, and in Georgia also they make this argument that there might be shortage of human resources in the judiciary if we try to have really some comprehensive reforms here, especially when we talk about vetting. In your opinion, what is the reason for this shortage? What is the reason for the shortage? Is it lack of lawyers? Is it some prerequisites, preconditions that candidates should meet in order to become judges? Or maybe there are other reasons for this shortage? It's just very interesting to know, because when we try to push for vetting, and when they say that in 2003 all judges were dismissed and new ones came in the system, but it did not work, it was not vetting. We should also mention this. Yes, this is my question. What do you think is the reason for a shortage? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very briefly, I think this is my personal view, that for many years, accession into the profession of the judges was viewed as something very difficult, which a simple law degree student will not reach if he or she does not have relatives in the system and influence, someone who will help him or her. Second, and this possesses the fact that for many years, the graduates from the law faculties did not choose to go into the judicial profession, but rather go and serve in the private practice. This trend can be reversed if you cleanse up the system and rebrand the system as an elite of the lawyers. Of course, the salary is also a thing which needs to be mentioned. Based on CEPES data in 2022, a starting judge from the district court will receive on hand netto amount 700 euros or $750, And based on the realities in the capital city of Chisinau, this is not something, this is not a high salary. On the contrary, this is like very low. And who will be attracted to go here, especially if you have a huge amount of workload, pressure, and so on and so forth. So this needs to be changed by the rebranding of the system and attracting. You have many professionals who could go into the judiciary now, but they need guarantees of independence, that there will not be telephone justice and somebody who helped him reach into the system will ask for his favor back. You need to raise up the salaries, and this could happen if you go through the pre-vetting and you pass the vetting, and then you can double up the salary in order to increase the popularity of the system. And this is, of course, something on the long term, but also the National Institute of Justice, who has on the docket more than 100 graduates now, needs to also check their integrity and to see whether these are the best candidates. We had statistics based on a 10-year research at the Legal Resource Center that 7 out of 10 new judges who entered into the system were not the very best one, but they were the chosen one by the Superior Council of Magistrates. I'll stop here.
Can I ask just a very quick question? What you said, what you just
Okay.
you said, yeah, yes, Keta.
No, okay, ask question and we will go to finalize our meeting.
Ilya, you mentioned that there is some kind of a quota to enter the Supreme Court. The specific quota for non-judges, for non-judges and for judges, you know, something like people who have not been judges before and who have not served in the judiciary before. Is that something that like a mandatory, you know, if, for example, out of 20 or out of 10 vacancies, 5 has to be from the outside? Is it something which is by the law, which is mandated by the law?
Yes. So the new reshape of the Supreme Court of Justice is provide that you have, let's say, lay members at the Supreme Court of Justice. The current amount is written in the law, and basically it says that 7. Wait a bit. It's 20. It's 20. It's 20 judges. Wait a bit. Yes, so you have 11 career judges and 9 lay member judges. So 9 from lawyers, prosecutors, academia, and 11 from career judges. You still have a majority of judges on board, but you also now have, and why this was done, basically saying that the new Supreme Court will have less cases to decide, but paramount cases. So like having a case who will decide the jurisprudence for the whole system. And you need, before this reform, we could say that you have a very narrow view of only career judges. But when you have on the docket a lawyer from this practice or a prosecutor, then the consensus, or at least the problems, can be viewed more broadly. Of course, it has some risks, but we believe this is a step up. And because sometimes you will get judges, prosecutors, and lawyers in one room, and they will not, let's say, they will have very different views on the things. But if you have a president of the Supreme Court, which was voted with high consensus of all the legal profession, there perhaps is more chance that these precedents will nurture and be followed throughout the system.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see that there is no raised hands, and we can now finalize our very interesting meeting. First of all, I want to thank our amazing presenters for their comprehensive and very interesting speeches and underlining the main points of judicial reforms, which is going through the Moldova to get the membership status of EU. Due to the sharing of the experience of Moldova, Georgia has an opportunity to envisage the problems and obstacles which are related to this full vetting, the pre-vetting, which is very interesting issues. And in Georgia, we have a different approach on this process now. And also it was very interesting to listen to this reforms of Supreme Court, and also the anti-corruption court is for us also very interesting, as we don't have also anti-corruption court. Civil society is also involvement of the civil society in the process of reforms is very important. And I think that for us, it's also very interesting to push all our efforts to the core issues and work more productive on judicial reforms. And in the end, I want to wish Moldova to receive, of course, membership for the EU status of to become the member of EU, and also for Georgia, I wish to get the candidate status, which we are also waiting. Thank you again. It was a pleasure for me to moderate this discussion today. And thank you all participants who have very special guests today. And I want to thank everyone. And I want to wish you very good and nice evening for today, and looking forward to meet you again and to cooperate with you again. Thank you very much.